Oliver Harrington prided himself on many things: his uncanny business acumen, his ability to charm any investor, and his gold standard reputation among New York's most elite social circles. He was, by all accounts, a self made billionaire with a taste for fine suits, lavish galas, and any wine that cost more than the average monthly mortgage. At a mere 30 years old, he had become a fixture on the society pages, constantly photographed, revered, and maybe even a little envied. But Oliver's success had come with a hidden quirk. He was inexplicably competitive. If he started a conversation about, say, the best cappuccinos in Rome, you could bet he'd soon be on a plane to verify it. It wasn't enough just to succeed. Oliver needed to conquer every challenge, no matter how ridiculous, which was precisely how, on a breezy Saturday evening, he found himself losing a bet he never should have made. It all began at the grand opening of the Skyline, a posh rooftop bar perched on the 50th floor of an iconic hotel. The city lights glistened, champagne bubbles sparkled in tall flutes, and well-dressed men and women mingled under a canopy of stars. Among them stood Oliver and three of his closest friends, Jonas, Leon, and Hayden, who knew him like the back of their hands. "Oliver," Jonas teased, swirling a glass of champagne, "since you're unstoppable in business, I bet you can't lay low for, say, a couple of weeks in a humble working situation." Oliver laughed, unconcerned. "You want me to ditch my office and go do what exactly? Work the fries at a fast food joint?" Hayden chimed in, his grin as wide as the Manhattan skyline. "No, not fries. We need you to do something truly out of your comfort zone. Wait tables, maybe bartend. Something that doesn't involve your usual fancy suits and corporate towers." Leon nudged Oliver's shoulder. "I'd pay to see that." "I'm game," Oliver boasted, stepping up to the plate in typical Oliver Harrington fashion. "Name the place. I'll kill it. I'll be the best employee they've ever seen." Jonas smirked, recognizing Oliver's telltale pride. "All right, big guy. How about a small diner in upstate New York? I've got a cousin who knows a diner manager. Somewhere not too far, but far enough that you won't be recognized." "I bet you can't handle going incognito for 2 weeks without quitting or getting recognized. No private jets, no fancy hotels. You'll stay in a modest place, you'll wear their uniform, and you won't tell a soul about who you really are." Oliver's dark eyes gleamed, full of mischief and challenge. He never turned down a bet. "You're on," he declared, shaking hands with Jonas. But then, as always happened, they took it one step too far. Hayden chimed in again. "And if you fail, if you tap out before the 2 weeks are up, or you accidentally reveal that you're a billionaire, you have to donate $1 million to the charity of our choice, plus host a little party in the diner itself. Deal?" Oliver's grin didn't waver. "Deal." And that was it. A formal handshake sealed an agreement so outrageous that the champagne bubbles might as well have been cackling as they floated to the surface. Oliver was confident, too confident. He assumed he'd breeze through the challenge, charm the pants off any staff, and walk away with yet another triumph under his belt. After all, how hard could it be? Little did he know. Losing that bet, or more accurately, living it out, would give him far more than bragging rights. It would give him an experience he'd never forget, and it would lead him straight to the woman who would change his life. 2 days later, Oliver stepped off a bus in the small, picturesque town of Willow Springs, upstate New York. It was the kind of place, with a single main street, white picket fences, and an ice cream parlor, that looked like it had been there since the 1950s. Locals milled about, some pushing strollers, others chatting with neighbors. The crisp air smelled of pine trees and freshly brewed coffee. It was charming, if not a little too quiet for Oliver's typical taste. The bus hissed away, leaving him standing there, suitcase in hand, wearing jeans and a plain jacket, both brand new, purchased specifically for blending in. He also wore a cap pulled low, covering the polished hair that had graced tabloid covers more times than he'd like to admit. In preparation for this bet, Oliver had foregone the private car. He had left behind his usual amenities, refused the fancy hotels, and was about to check into a modest bed and breakfast. He followed Jonas's directions until he found himself at the worn but welcoming door of Kettle's Diner. He took a breath, steeling himself for what lay ahead. The diner was a sturdy brick building on the corner, with oversized windows revealing a cozy interior, a neon sign that read Kettle's Diner, Est 1963 buzzed overhead. Oliver opened the door. An old-fashioned bell jingled, announcing his arrival. The immediate aroma of sizzling bacon and freshly baked pies wafted over him. A few patrons glanced his way, mostly older folks sipping coffee, an exhausted mother trying to wrangle two kids, and a couple of teenagers sharing a milkshake. In the back corner, a tall man in a white apron wiped the counter. That must be the manager, Oliver thought. The man looked up, revealing a friendly, weathered face. He greeted Oliver with a smile so genuine that Oliver nearly forgot he was supposed to be inconspicuous. "Hey there," the man said, wiping his hands on his apron. "You must be Oliver, Jonas's friend?" Oliver nodded and extended his hand, pretending not to notice that the manager's handshake was strong enough to crush a coconut. "That's me, sir, Oliver. Oliver Harris." He caught himself just in time, remembering he was supposed to use a partial alias. "Welcome to Kettles," the man said warmly. "I'm Jean. We could really use the help, especially tonight. One of our bartenders called in sick. You up for slinging some drinks?" Oliver squared his shoulders, summoning the same confidence he used when closing a billion-dollar deal. "Absolutely. I can't say I've done a ton of bartending, but I'm a quick learner," Jean chuckled. "We'll start you off with the simpler stuff. No complicated cocktails, mostly just beers on tap, some whiskey, and a couple of the local favorites. We've got a small bar area off to the side. Gets busier on weekend nights, but you'll be fine." Oliver exhaled. This was happening. He was about to become a bartender, incognito, in a small town. No one here had the faintest clue that he owned multiple properties around the world or that he regularly ate at Michelin-starred restaurants. For a brief moment, the reality of what he'd signed up for loomed in front of him. 2 weeks in a place where no one recognized his last name or cared about his bank account. A sliver of unexpected excitement tickled his chest. This was new territory. Just then, the door behind the bar swung open, and out came a woman with a ponytail of light brown hair, a tray balanced expertly on one hand. She set 3 plates down on the counter, then turned around to get more cutlery. She wore the standard diner uniform, black shirt, black pants, and a green apron. A small silver name tag read Amelia. Her stride was purposeful, and Oliver couldn't help but notice the subtle grace in the way she moved, like someone who'd worked on her feet for years and was used to hustle. "Hey, Jean, table 4's ready," she said, not yet noticing Oliver. "Can you ring up that?" She looked up, and her words caught when she saw the tall stranger behind the bar. Oliver, for his part, found himself momentarily stunned. She had bright hazel eyes, a dusting of freckles across her nose, and the kind of smile that seemed like it could be coaxed out if you knew the right joke. Right now, though, she wasn't smiling. She was assessing him, as if trying to figure out whether he was a lost tourist or a new hire. "Oh, Amelia," Jean said brightly. "This is Oliver, Jonas's buddy. He's our new part-timer. He'll be taking a few bar shifts and helping out with whatever else needs doing." She nodded, still giving Oliver a once-over. "I'm Amelia," she said. He extended his hand. "Oliver, pleasure to meet you." She shook it swiftly. "Welcome to Kettles. Let's see how long you last." He raised an eyebrow at the challenge in her voice. "Longer than you might expect." A smirk crept onto her lips, but she didn't comment further. She simply passed him a bar apron from under the counter. "Here you go. Chop chop, city boy. We've got customers waiting." Oliver almost laughed. He wasn't used to being ordered around. In his usual life, people rushed to do his bidding. Yet here he was, about to do the bidding of a woman whose name tag read Amelia, and whose eyes seemed to call him out on every ounce of arrogance. For a split second, Oliver thought, this might actually be fun. That evening, Oliver learned the ropes from Amelia and from another server named Ron, a gregarious retiree who worked at the diner to stay busy. Amelia explained the bar layout quickly. "We've got 4 beers on tap, 2 local crafts, 1 regular domestic, and 1 light beer. Top shelf liquors are locked in the cabinet, but no one here really orders the fancy stuff. We have some cheap whiskey, a few basic vodkas, and gin. I'd say the most complicated request you'll get is a margarita or an old-fashioned." Oliver listened closely, but his mind wandered for a moment, noticing the way the overhead lights made her eyes shimmer or how the faint smell of vanilla clung to her. Got it, he said, snapping back to attention. I'll do my best not to cause any property damage. Amelia laughed, a sweet sound that made Oliver's stomach tumble in an unexpected flip. I hope so. Jean has a soft spot for newbies, but not so much for broken glass. Soon, customers ambled in, some for dinner, others for drinks. Oliver fumbled a little at first. He poured a beer with too much foam, miscounted a customer's change, and forgot to wipe down the bar after a spill. Each time, Amelia slid in to correct him with a firm but calm directive. Tilt the glass more so you don't waste half the keg. Or that's a quarter, not a nickel. He wanted to be exasperated, to bristle at being told how to do menial tasks by someone younger and presumably far less worldly. But something about Amelia's patient, straight-talking approach disarmed him. It was clear she wasn't being condescending. She was just making sure he learned the right way so that he wouldn't get chewed out by Jean or shortchange a customer. And that same night, he saw what a remarkable server she was, always balancing trays with ease, gracefully maneuvering around the narrow spaces, and greeting each table with genuine warmth. She knew the regulars by name, asked about their kids and their grandkids, offered them their usuals before they could ask. For new faces, she took a moment to recommend the best dishes on the menu. Watching her, Oliver realized something crucial. Amelia exuded authenticity. She gave the same open friendliness to everyone, from the rowdy group of teens in the corner booth to the elderly couple who came in for their nightly cup of decaf coffee. When the rush finally died down around 9, Amelia claimed a stool near the bar to rest her aching feet, exhaling a small sigh. Oliver was wiping down the counter, a chore he'd repeated a dozen times that evening. Long day? He asked, leaning in a bit. She offered him a half smile. Every day's a long day here if you're doing it right. Then a curious flicker crossed her eyes. So, Jonas is your buddy, right? You come from the city? Oliver tread carefully. Yeah, from Manhattan. My day job was running errands for a big corporate firm. It wasn't exactly a lie. He'd run errands for his own empire, after all. He left it vague, hoping she wouldn't pry too deep. She nodded, accepting his answer easily. Manhattan, huh? Must be a big change coming here. He shrugged, feigning nonchalance. I needed a break from the hustle, I guess. Amelia studied him briefly, as if picking apart his words. Then she simply said, Well, you'll get your break, but not in the sense you might think. This place will keep you plenty busy. She patted the counter twice, hopped off the stool, and headed to take a to-go order from a late-arriving customer. Oliver found himself watching her again, drawn to her straightforward manner. It was refreshing. For once, nobody was asking him for a favor or an insider tip, or trying to curry favor with the wealthy man in the room. Here, he was just Oliver, the new part-timer. That simple anonymity felt strangely good. Over the next week, Oliver settled into a routine. He'd wake up in a modest room at the local bed and breakfast, a small space with creaky floors and quilts that smelled faintly of lavender. He'd grab coffee at the corner bakery, then walk a few blocks to Kettle's Diner, arriving just in time for the morning shift. Some days he worked as a bartender, other days he restocked supplies, cleaned tables, and even learned a bit of short-order cooking on the grill under Jean's watchful eye. The bet demanded that Oliver remain as inconspicuous as possible. No calls from fancy phones, no custom-tailored suits, no extravagant dinners. Jonas texted him from time to time, reminding him of the stakes. How's life in the trenches? Still scrubbing plates? And Oliver would grin through clenched teeth, determined to prove he was made of sterner stuff. With each day, he gained more competence behind the bar, surprising even Amelia. Once, an adventurous customer ordered a martini. Oliver improvised, recalling what he'd seen bartenders do at exclusive clubs. He chilled the glass, shook the gin vigorously, strained it carefully, and garnished it with a lemon twist. He couldn't help noticing Amelia's raised eyebrow when he slid the martini across the counter to the customer. Fancy, she teased later, wiping down an empty booth. I didn't think you had it in you. He pretended to examine a non-existent speck on his apron. I'm full of surprises. They shared a moment of easy camaraderie, the kind that had been forming slowly since his arrival. Amelia had warmed up to him, in her own understated way. She no longer hovered over him every time he made change for a customer, trusting he'd counted it right. She'd tease him about how he managed to keep his shirt sleeves so pristine, or how he insisted on polishing the bar top meticulously, and he found himself looking forward to these exchanges more than he cared to admit. It wasn't just Amelia who'd taken a liking to him. Most of the other staff had adopted Oliver with open arms. Ron, the retiree server, started calling him Kiddo and regaled him with stories of his time in the Navy. Jill, the sous chef, taught him how to whip up the diner's secret gravy without setting the stove on fire. And Jean treated him like a nephew, always offering praise or a pat on the shoulder whenever Oliver picked up a shift. Among the regulars, Oliver became something of a curiosity. The more talkative ones would probe him. "So, Oliver, what brings you to Willow Springs? Are you running from something? A heartbreak, maybe?" Oliver would laugh and keep answers vague but never rude. He kept to the bet's rules, maintaining his just a regular guy front. It wasn't as hard as he'd expected. He found he actually enjoyed the laid-back environment, the genuineness, the ability to just be. And every day, he'd catch glimpses of Amelia's world. From little exchanges he observed, he discovered she lived alone in a small apartment, and that she took care of her younger sister, Rosie, who was away at college. Amelia worked full-time to pay bills and help Rosie pay tuition. She never complained, though. She tackled double shifts with grit and a sense of humor, rarely giving in to exhaustion. Oliver respected that. It made him realize, with a strange pang, how much he'd taken his own comforts for granted. While he'd poured money into lavish parties or impulsive investments, someone like Amelia was working every single day to make ends meet and to ensure someone else's future. Perhaps that was the seed of what he was starting to feel. Admiration, curiosity, and, if he was honest, attraction. It was that last feeling that took him by surprise, because he was used to very different women in his life, those who attended the same exclusive gatherings or played the same high-stakes game of see and be seen. But Amelia, she was real, grounded, and she saw straight through any facade. If he turned up the old Harrington charm, she'd probably roll her eyes. And yet, that made him want to charm her all the more. "Table 6 wants 2 coffees and a slice of apple pie," Amelia said, scribbling something on her notepad. It was a Monday evening, uncommonly busy. Oliver was behind the bar, finishing up a line of orders. He nodded to Amelia. "Got it, coffee and apple pie, coming right up." She paused, tapping her pen against her notepad. "Could you also take a look at the cappuccino machine? The frother isn't working properly. And you seem to have a knack for figuring out mechanical stuff." He smirked. "My father always said if you can't fix something, you shouldn't own it." Amelia raised an eyebrow. "Your father sounds like a wise man." Oliver chuckled to himself. His father had never said anything of the sort. He'd grown up in a financially unstable household. His father's real motto had been, "Scrape by and keep your head down." Oliver had soared above that, forging his own path. But he let Amelia think what she would. He slipped into the back to inspect the cappuccino machine, rummaging around with a small screwdriver. After a few minutes of fiddling, it hissed and whirred back to life. Proud of himself, Oliver wiped his hands on a rag and headed back to the bar. "Fixed," he called to Amelia. "Next time you want a latte art swan, let me know. I'll give it a shot." She tilted her head, grinning. "Now there's a trick I'd pay to see." Then she paused, as if considering something. "Thanks, you're handy to have around." Her compliment was straightforward, but it still caused a surge of warmth in Oliver's chest. "I do what I can." The good mood didn't last long. Within minutes, 2 men came in, sauntering over to the bar. They wore leather jackets and had an air of casual arrogance that Oliver recognized from a mile away. He'd seen their type in the city clubs, the ones who thought the world owed them something. Amelia, ever the professional, greeted them cheerily. "Evening, guys. What can I get you?" They exchanged looks and ordered beers. One of them, with slicked-back hair, gave Amelia a slow once-over that sent a prickle of unease through Oliver. The other, sporting a permanent scowl, snickered under his breath. The men began chatting loudly, occasionally swearing in a way that drew glances from the other patrons. Amelia tried to ignore them, focusing on the rest of her tables. Oliver slid over to quietly remind them, "We try to keep it family-friendly in here," and for a short while, they settled. But as soon as Amelia returned to drop off their beers, the slick-haired one leaned over the bar. "Hey, sweetheart," he said. "You see any real men around here? Or is it just guys like that new hire?" He jabbed a thumb at Oliver, who bristled. Amelia's smile turned tight. "We've got all kinds of folks here. Enjoy your drinks." He wasn't finished. "You got any nights off? Maybe you could show me around unless you're into amateurs." He gestured again at Oliver with a sneer. Oliver's jaw clenched. He'd been in enough business dealings to know how to keep his cool, but these guys were stepping on his last nerve. He glanced at Amelia, who shook her head subtly, as if telling him to let it go. So he did, for her sake. But the tension simmered. The two men ordered another round, then another. They became rowdier, hollering across the diner at each other, throwing out flirty remarks at Amelia whenever she passed. By the time they started arguing about the bill, Oliver had reached the end of his patience. He saw Amelia trying to handle it with her usual graciousness, but they clearly weren't listening. Finally, Oliver walked over, arms folded. "Gentlemen," he said quietly, "time to settle up. We're closing soon." One of them sneered. "Closing soon, or you can't handle customers?" Oliver kept his voice level. "It's almost 10, and we're wrapping up for the night. Pay the tab and please head out." Slick Hair slammed a few bills on the bar. "Fine, but we'll be back another time. See if your waitress is more open to suggestions." Oliver felt his blood boil, but Amelia brushed past him, picked up the money, and calmly said, "Have a good night." The two finally stumbled out, leaving the diner heavy with the aftertaste of conflict. Amelia watched them go, releasing a slow breath. "Thanks for stepping in," she said softly. "But I can handle these things. We get all kinds." Oliver nodded, forcibly unclenching his fists. "I know you can. I just don't like seeing you deal with that nonsense." She offered a small, appreciative smile before returning to clean up the table they'd vacated. Oliver stood there for a moment, grappling with the protective instinct that had just flared within him. He realized he cared about Amelia's well-being far more than he wanted to admit. It was an unexpected feeling, but one he couldn't deny, and that moment, as minor as it was, cemented the idea in his mind that he was fully invested in staying here for the duration of his bet, and maybe even longer. Willow Springs, once a mere stepping stone in a ridiculous challenge, was quickly feeling like a place where he truly belonged. A few days later, Amelia was behind the bar after finishing her own shift, sipping a glass of water to rehydrate. Oliver, finishing up cleaning duties, took a seat on a stool next to her. "Tiring day?" he asked. She shrugged. "Standard, but yeah, I'm beat." He quietly studied her. The overhead lights illuminated the faint circles under her eyes, the result of constant double shifts. He imagined how stressful it might be to juggle bills, responsibilities, and taking care of her sister's expenses. It gave him a pang of guilt, thinking of how easily he'd pay Rosie's college tuition if he could. Just write a check, problem solved. But that would blow his cover spectacularly. "What do you do outside work?" he asked softly. "Any hobbies?" She scoffed in a gentle way. "Outside work? That's a concept. No, I read sometimes, watch movies. I like going on runs when I can. Nothing too interesting." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the bar. "Running is interesting. It's healthy and all that." A small laugh escaped her. "Guess so. How about you? Why'd you leave Manhattan?" Oliver hesitated. He'd been waiting for that question. He opted for partial honesty. "I wanted to see if I could handle a slower pace. My life was intense. Always climbing the ladder, making deals, chasing success. It felt like I never breathed." Her expression softened. "And did you find what you were looking for?" He swallowed, choosing his words carefully. "Maybe, or maybe I found something better than what I thought I needed." That made her blink, and the air between them crackled with a subtle tension. She cleared her throat, placing the empty glass on the bar. "Well, Willow Springs does have fresh air if nothing else." Oliver nodded. "I can't argue with that." Gene poked his head out of the kitchen. "Oliver, need a hand back here before you head out?" "Sure thing," Oliver called back. He gave Amelia one last glance. "Get some rest, okay?" She gave a small nod, her lips quirking in a faint smile. "You too." Later that week, Oliver found himself in the stockroom taking inventory. He heard footsteps behind him and turned to see Amelia, arms crossed, leaning in the doorway. "Hey," he said, "you need something?" She pursed her lips as though weighing whether to speak. I wanted to say thanks. You've been pulling your weight. And I appreciate the support you gave me the other night with those jerks. This job can be tough sometimes. Job can be tough sometimes, and most people just shrug it off. He shrugged in return. Well, you do a lot for this place, for everybody. You deserve to work in peace. A moment hung between them. The small stockroom was dim, its overhead light flickering slightly. Amelia stepped forward, her eyes glowing with the sincerity of her next question. Oliver, are you sure you're just here for a little getaway? You work like a guy who's got something to prove. And sometimes you talk like, there's more to the story. His heartbeat kicked up a notch. What do you mean? She hesitated, then shook her head. I don't know. I'm just curious. No one from Manhattan randomly decides to bartend at a small-town diner for 2 whole weeks. And you've got these little quirks, like how you can fix that cappuccino machine so easily, or whip up a perfect martini, or the fact you somehow know exactly how to talk to bigwig customers. Not that we get many here. She gave him a pointed look. You're an interesting mystery, Oliver Harris. Oliver felt his palms grow sweaty. He forced a smile. Thanks, I guess. I'm just a restless guy who wanted a change. The half-truth landed in the air between them. Amelia's gaze lingered on him for a moment, as if searching for answers he wasn't ready to give. Then she relented, giving a light shrug. All right, then. Just know you can be honest with me if you ever want to talk. Those words struck him deeper than he expected. I appreciate that. She nodded and left him there, surrounded by crates of bottled sodas and boxes of coffee beans, feeling as though the walls themselves knew how close he was to revealing himself and how badly he wanted to share the truth with her, even though he couldn't. Because that ridiculous bet, still loomed over him. Even if he wanted to throw it all away and tell Amelia everything, he couldn't bear the humiliation of losing. And more than that, he worried she'd resent him if she learned he'd essentially waltzed in here under false pretenses. So he kept quiet, burying his longing under the weight of secrecy. The weekend arrived, and with it, an influx of travelers passing through the quiet town. The diner bustled from morning to night, which meant Oliver and Amelia spent long hours working side by side. Amelia taught him how to operate the waffle station during breakfast rush. He ended up covered in batter after a mishap with the press. She laughed, and for once, Oliver didn't mind being the butt of the joke, because her laughter was worth it. Later that afternoon, he returned the favor, showing her a new technique he'd picked up for making cappuccino foam. She teased him about being too fancy for Willow Springs, but she also grinned when she tasted the result. By evening, he was back behind the bar, serving cold beers and the occasional cocktail. They had a steady stream of customers, but the vibe was light. Amelia would occasionally pop over to the bar to chat with him, share an inside joke, or hand him more napkins. More than once, he found himself sneaking glances at her, unable to ignore the gentle flutter in his stomach every time she was near. During a lull, they leaned on the counter, each sipping a soda. Music from the jukebox drifted across the diner, some old country tune about heartbreak and highways. Amelia tilted her head toward the speakers. You into country music? She asked. He chuckled. Would you believe me if I said I'm learning to like it? She grinned. I'd believe it. You strike me as a guy who can adapt to anything. He shrugged. Maybe. Lately I feel like I'm discovering new sides to myself I never even knew. Is that a good thing? He exhaled. Yeah, scary, but good. Amelia regarded him for a moment, then placed her half-empty soda on the bar. I like that. Changing, I mean. Some people stay stuck forever doing the same thing, refusing to grow. Oliver swallowed, fighting the urge to tell her everything, that he was changing, that he wanted to be better, that maybe this entire bet had done him a favor. But he held back. In that brief lull, they locked eyes, and Oliver felt the tension thicken. He thought about leaning in, maybe saying something bold, but a group of rowdy teenagers burst through the door, filling the diner with laughter and chatter. Amelia smiled apologetically and returned to work, leaving Oliver feeling simultaneously relieved and disappointed. Monday came, bringing a quieter pace. Jean gave Oliver the morning off, so Oliver decided to stroll through the town's small park. The leaves were beginning to turn, adding a golden hue to the winding paths. He sipped a to-go coffee, enjoying the crisp air, and found himself thinking about Amelia, her sense of humor, her warm spirit, her freckles. It was no longer just idle attraction. He knew he was on the verge of something deeper. By midday, he headed to the diner for his shift. But on his way, he spotted Amelia sitting on a bench outside, a worried crease on her forehead. She didn't notice him at first, so he quietly approached. "Hey," he said softly, and she jumped slightly before catching her breath. "Oh, Oliver, didn't see you there. You okay?" He sat down next to her on the bench. Up close, she looked more stressed than he'd ever seen. Her eyes were distant, and she was tapping her foot nervously. She sighed. "Just personal stuff. My sister called. Her college fees have gone up, and she's worried about making ends meet next semester." Amelia's gaze dropped to her hands in her lap. "I told her not to worry, that I'd figure something out, but I have no idea how." Oliver's heart clenched. He tamped down the urge to blurt out that he could cover Rosie's college fees without blinking. But that would be the ultimate reveal, a move that could jeopardize everything. Still, it pained him to see Amelia this way. He placed a hand on her shoulder, gentle, reassuring. "I'm sorry. That's tough. You've been carrying a lot." She forced a small smile. "I'll figure it out. I always do." A wave of admiration washed over him. "Is there anything I can do?" She hesitated, then shook her head. "Not unless you magically found a tree that sprouts tuition checks." He chuckled softly, wishing he could say that in a way he had. But he respected her independence and the dignity she took in solving her own problems. He squeezed her shoulder once before standing. "Come on, let's go inside. Maybe a busy shift will help distract you." She rose with him, and they walked together into the diner, where the familiar clang of dishes and aroma of coffee felt like a small, soothing refuge from life's problems. Amelia took a few steadying breaths and slipped behind the hostess stand, a professional smile sliding into place. Oliver couldn't help thinking how little she knew about who he truly was, how easily he could ease her burdens. But the bet, and more importantly her own pride, kept him silent. He resolved, then and there, that when he revealed the truth, he'd do it in a way that wouldn't make her feel small or indebted. Because she deserved more than that. She deserved respect, honesty, and the choice to accept help if she wanted it. By the end of the second week, Oliver's time at Kettle's Diner was almost up. He'd successfully stayed in the game, never letting slip that he was a billionaire. Not once had he broken his cover, though there had been more than a few close calls when he casually mentioned something about "my personal driver," only to cough and say, "I mean my buddy who used to pick me up when I needed a ride." Amelia and Oliver had grown closer in that time. Inside jokes, shared confidences, quiet moments over slices of pie after closing time. On his penultimate night, the diner was slow, and Jean closed early, giving them the chance to sit at a booth in the back, splitting a slice of cherry pie. Amelia leaned back in the booth, chewing thoughtfully. "So your break from the city is about over, huh?" Oliver nodded, feeling his chest tighten. "Seems like it." She picked at the crust of the pie with her fork. "Any plans for what you'll do next?" He exhaled. "Probably head back. My old job is waiting." Again, he tried to keep his words vague. "But I'm not sure I want to return to the same life I left." Amelia studied him carefully. "Meaning?" He shrugged. "I've realized that I might have been chasing things that don't make me happy, or at least I've found new reasons to be happy here." Her cheeks colored slightly. She kept her eyes on the pie. "I know the feeling, actually. Willow Springs is my home, but part of me dreams about moving away someday. Going somewhere new, you know?" He found himself wanting to invite her to see the world with him, show her the places he'd visited, the wonders he'd taken for granted, but he was trapped in the confines of the bet. "You could," he said quietly. She offered a wistful smile. "Maybe someday, when I have the money. For now, I've got responsibilities." They fell silent, a comfortable hush, yet laden with unspoken things. The diner's overhead lights buzzed softly, and beyond the windows, a light rain began to fall, pattering on the sidewalk. Finally, Oliver mustered the courage to speak more from his heart. "Amelia, I'm going to be honest. These past 2 weeks, they've been some of the best I've had in a long time. Because of this place, yes, but mostly because of you." Her eyes snapped up to his, wide and questioning. Oliver, he pressed on before nerves could still his tongue. I came here thinking it would be a short break, a joke almost, but you, working with you, getting to know you, you're real in a way that a lot of people I know aren't. I've spent most of my life around phonies or people who care more about money than anything else. But you care about people. You work hard. You do the right thing. And well, I admire you a lot. Amelia's cheeks flushed, but she didn't look away. That's incredibly sweet, she whispered. You're not so bad yourself. Emboldened, he gently reached across the table for her hand. She let him take it, and her gaze flickered with uncertainty and hope. Amelia, he said, heart pounding, when I leave, I don't want this, whatever's happening between us, to just fade away. She squeezed his hand. It doesn't have to, she said softly. We can keep in touch, call, write, visit, if that's what we both want. He nodded, feeling relief and warmth flood him. I'd like that. For a moment, the entire diner and its flickering lights seemed to vanish, leaving just the two of them, hands entwined over an empty plate of cherry pie. The air felt alive with the promise of something more, something that could grow if they gave it a chance. But at the same time, a knot of guilt and fear twisted in Oliver's gut. He was falling for her, and he was lying to her, even if by omission. The reveal was inevitable, but he still clung to the hope he could do it gently, on his own terms, without humiliating her or betraying the trust they'd built. All he could do was wait and see if fate, or maybe his own overconfident friends, had other plans. On Oliver's final day, Jean announced they'd hold a small farewell dinner for him, just the diner staff, with some homemade dishes after closing. Amelia helped plan the menu, bringing in a dessert. Ron joked that Oliver was graduating from the diner with honors. And Jill teased that maybe he'd become a big-shot bartender back in the city. Oliver tried to laugh it off, but his stomach was in knots. Technically, after that night, the bet was fulfilled. He'd lasted the 2 weeks without revealing his identity. A part of him was relieved. He wouldn't owe Jonas, Leon, and Hayden $1 million. But another part of him dreaded leaving, because it meant stepping back into his old life without Amelia. The dinner was set for 9, after the diner closed. In the early evening, the place was hopping, so Oliver and Amelia barely had a moment to share a glance. Table after table, order after order, they worked seamlessly. It felt like a well-oiled machine, the best team in the county. Everything was going well, until around 8:30 the door chimed, and Oliver looked up to see 3 familiar faces step inside. Jonas, Leon, and Hayden. Oliver's heart sank. They walked in grinning, wearing their city clothes like a neon sign. The second Jonas spotted Oliver behind the bar, his grin widened. Well, well, Jonas called out, if it isn't the hardest-working bartender in upstate New York. Hayden and Leon flanked him, exchanging looks like they had an inside joke. Oliver's palms went clammy. He had no idea what they were planning, but he knew it wouldn't be good. Amelia was at the register, finishing a transaction, and Ron was at the far end of the diner, dealing with the last table. The place had begun to empty out, leaving just Oliver's unsuspecting coworkers and a handful of customers. Jonas sauntered over to the bar, leaning on it. So, you made it to the finish line, Harrington. Guess we owe you dinner, and you owe us the story of how it felt to lose your private jet and live like a normal person for 2 weeks. Oliver felt his blood run cold. Jonas, he hissed, not here. Leon laughed. Why not here? I want to see the faces of the staff who had no idea they were working with an actual billionaire. Hayden gave Oliver a sympathetic shrug. Hey, a bet's a bet. You won. We're here to congratulate you, man, and maybe see the look on everyone's face when they realize you were slumming it for fun. Oliver's jaw clenched. This was exactly the scenario he'd dreaded. He shot a glance at Amelia, who had turned to see what was going on. Her expression was puzzled, tinged with concern. Jean emerged from the kitchen, pausing with a perplexed frown. Oliver, everything okay? Oliver wanted to vanish. He wanted to hit the pause button and usher his so-called friends out the door before they tore down everything he'd built here. But Jonas was already turning to Jean with a bright, boisterous smile. Don't mind us, we're just here for a little celebration. Our friend Oliver Harrington, yep, that Harrington, just won a bet he made with us. He managed to work here incognito for 2 weeks. Never thought he'd last, but, well, he did. Silence slammed into the diner like a wrecking ball. Jean's mouth fell open. Ron, who had been carrying a tray, nearly dropped it in shock. Jill poked her head out from the kitchen, eyes wide. A few remaining customers murmured in confusion. And Amelia stood rooted to the spot, eyes locked on Oliver. She looked shell-shocked, as if someone had just yanked the floor out from under her. Color drained from her cheeks, replaced by a slow burn of understanding, then hurt. Oliver's heart hammered in his chest. "Amelia," he started to say, "I can explain." She shook her head, her eyes shiny with betrayal. "You're a billionaire? This was all a bet?" Leon chuckled, oblivious to the emotional carnage. It sure was. He had to hide his identity and prove he could work like an average Joe. Honestly, I didn't think he could pull it off. Oliver's throat tightened. He reached a hand toward Amelia, but she stepped back. "You lied to me," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. We talked about honesty, about trust, and you were just pretending?" He tried to speak, to explain. "It wasn't like that, Amelia. I really did come here under the bet, but—" She didn't let him finish. Her voice rose with an anger that made his stomach twist. "So everything you told me, all that talk about wanting a simpler life, was any of it real? Or were you just laughing behind my back the whole time, playing the role of a broke worker, making a fool of me?" He took a shaky breath, wishing he could shield her from the embarrassment. "No, you have to believe me. This started as a bet, yes, but I stayed because I wanted to, because I grew to care about you, about this place. My feelings are real." But she shook her head, tears threatening to spill. "I don't know what's real. For all I know, this is just another game to you." She tore off her apron, slamming it on the counter. Then she turned and marched out the door without another word. The old-fashioned bell jangled, mocking Oliver as she vanished into the night. Oliver stood there, heart in his throat. Jean gave him a wounded look before retreating to the kitchen. Ron slowly set down his tray, his gaze a mixture of shock and disappointment. One by one, the staff turned away, leaving Oliver alone behind the bar with Jonas, Leon, and Hayden. Hayden cleared his throat, awkward now. We didn't mean to create a scene." Oliver leveled a look at him so fierce that Hayden took a step back. "Just go," Oliver rasped, voice filled with a sorrow he couldn't contain. "I'll deal with this." Jonas held up his hands defensively. "We're sorry, man. We thought—" "Go," Oliver repeated, more firmly. "Now." They left, looking chastened, and Oliver sank onto a bar stool, burying his face in his hands. He'd completed the bet. He'd won. But as he sat there, listening to the hum of the fluorescent lights and tasting bitterness in his mouth, he knew he'd lost the only thing that truly mattered in the process. That night was a blur of regret and restless pacing. Oliver tried calling Amelia's phone, but she didn't pick up. He left a message, stumbling over his words, apologizing, begging for a chance to explain. No reply came. In the morning, he went to the diner, only to find that Amelia had called in sick. Jean was curt with Oliver, only speaking to give him tasks, and Ron avoided eye contact. Eventually, Jean sat Oliver down in his office. The older man sighed heavily. "I've known Jonas for a while. Didn't think he'd pull something like this. But I guess I should have seen the red flags when he said you were just taking a break from the city." Oliver nodded bleakly. "You have every right to be upset. I never wanted to hurt anyone, especially not Amelia." Jean studied him for a moment, his expression torn. She's a special one. She trusts people easily, but when that trust is broken," he pressed his lips together. "Look, Oliver or Harrington or whoever you are, you do good work here. You helped us out and I appreciate it. But if you really care about Amelia, you need to fix this. She's hurting, and not just because you're rich. It's because you lied to her." Oliver swallowed hard. "I know. I'll do whatever it takes." Jean stood. "I'll give her a call later, see how she's doing. In the meantime, maybe give her some space. If she wants to talk to you, she will." Oliver nodded, his heart heavy. He stepped out of the office, scanning the diner. It felt different now, chilly and unwelcoming. He realized he couldn't stay, not like this. So he quietly removed his apron and placed it on the counter, then walked out. He spent the rest of the day in his small bed and breakfast room, staring at the phone, waiting for a message or call that never came. The thought of leaving Willow Springs without making things right left him feeling nauseous. He refused to return to Manhattan until he'd at least attempted to mend the damage. It took 2 more days of waiting before Amelia finally returned to her shift at Kettle's Diner. Oliver found out through a message from Ron, who casually mentioned she was back. Oliver threw on a jacket and hurried over, heart pounding. When he entered, the bells jingled overhead. Amelia was waiting a table near the front, her posture stiff. She wore the same uniform, but the light in her eyes was gone. She sensed his presence before turning, her expression guarded. "Amelia," he said softly, approaching slowly. "Could we talk?" She clenched her jaw, finished taking the customer's order, and gave the slip to Ron. Prosody. Then she turned to Oliver, arms folded protectively. "I'm working." He nodded, keeping his voice quiet. "Just give me 5 minutes, outside, please." She hesitated then, with a sigh, nodded. She untied her apron and walked out with him onto the sidewalk, arms folded to block the chill. They stood under the diner's neon sign, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows. Oliver took a breath. "I need you to know that I never meant to deceive you in a cruel way. The bet was stupid. I thought I could handle it, just be anonymous for a while. But then I met you, and everything changed. I didn't know how to tell you the truth without losing you." Amelia's eyes flickered with pain. "But you lost me anyway, didn't you? Because you kept lying. You had so many chances to come clean." He nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. "I know. I was scared. I realized I'd started falling for you, and I panicked. I wanted to be with you, but I didn't want to ruin what we had." She looked away, blinking quickly. "Do you have any idea how humiliated I felt, standing there while your friends made me look like a fool? Like I was some project you took on to prove you could mingle with us commoners?" Her voice cracked, and tears threatened to break free. Oliver's chest tightened with guilt. "I'm so sorry. My friends don't represent how I feel about you. I tried to stop them, but it was too late." She rubbed her forehead, tears finally slipping. "I can't just forget this. I trusted you. I cared about you." He reached out, gently brushing away a tear with his thumb. She allowed it, but didn't lean into him. "Please, Amelia, let me make it up to you," he whispered. "Let me prove that my feelings are real, that money doesn't define me. Let me help you with Rosie's tuition or anything you need." That suggestion acted like a slap. She jerked back, eyes flashing. "No, I don't want your money. How dare you even offer that after everything? Do you think you can just fix this by throwing your billions at it?" He realized his mistake. "That's not what I meant. She held up a hand. "Don't. I don't want to hear it. I'm not some charity case. I can handle my life on my own." He ran a hand through his hair, frustration mingling with despair. "I know you can. I'm sorry. I just want to help. I want to be with you." She folded her arms again, tears drying on her cheeks. "I need time, Oliver, and a lot of space. Right now, every time I see you, I remember how this all started. A bet that doesn't go away overnight." He nodded, feeling as though a blade were twisting in his gut. "Take all the time you need. I'll be here, or I'll come back as often as it takes." She turned, retying her apron around her waist. "Don't make promises you can't keep." Then she opened the door and slipped back into the diner, leaving him alone on the sidewalk with the silent neon sign humming overhead. Oliver stayed in Willow Springs for 3 more days, lingering at the bed and breakfast, hoping for a miracle. But Amelia avoided him, making sure their paths barely crossed in the diner, skipping out after her shifts. Jean tried to comfort Oliver, but the older man was firm. "She's hurt. Don't push her. She'll come around if it's meant to be." At last, Oliver had to face reality. He had business to attend to in the city, meetings, responsibilities he'd left hanging. Even though his heart ached at the thought, he packed his bag and took one last walk through the town, soaking in the quiet streets, the cozy storefronts, the place that had given him a glimpse of a life he never knew he wanted. He wrote a letter to Amelia, pouring out his feelings, explaining everything in more detail than he ever had allowed. He left it in an envelope with Jean, along with a note asking Jean to pass it on at the right time. Then he left Willow Springs in a simple rental car, driving off with a heavy heart and the taste of regret. Back in Manhattan, life resumed at a dizzying pace. Oliver's phone buzzed constantly with business emails, meeting invitations, and new proposals. Jonas, Leon, and Hayden tried to make amends, inviting him out for a welcome back dinner, but Oliver declined. He was civil to them. After all, they were old friends, but a part of him resented the bet that had changed everything. Or maybe he resented himself for taking it in the first place. He moved through the city like a ghost, going from boardroom to penthouse to private gym, all the while remembering the clang of diner dishes and the laughter of coworkers who had welcomed him without question. Most of all, he remembered Amelia's smile before everything went south, and the devastation in her eyes afterward. Weeks passed. He heard nothing from her. He tried to give her space, contacting Jean only once to confirm Amelia was okay. Jean simply responded, "She's fine," and left it at that. Oliver focused on his businesses, but his heart wasn't in it anymore. The city, once so thrilling, felt hollow. Late one night, after a particularly grueling day of meetings, Oliver returned to his penthouse and found a letter waiting for him. The front was addressed in a neat, looping script that he instantly recognized as Jean's. His hands shook as he tore it open. Inside was a short note. "Oliver, Amelia read your letter. She took some time to think things over. I don't want to speak for her, but she asked me to pass something along. This address. She'll be there this Saturday evening around 7 p.m. If you're willing to make the drive, I think you'll find it worth your while. All the best, Jean." Included with the note was a small slip of paper with an address he didn't recognize. Oliver read it twice, heart pounding with renewed hope. He wasted no time. By Saturday afternoon, he was on the road, driving north again, the cityscape giving way to rolling hills and trees. The sun dipped low on the horizon, painting the sky in streaks of pink and orange by the time he neared the address. It turned out to be a small lakeside park just beyond Willow Springs, with a dock that stretched into calm waters surrounded by swaying pines. Oliver parked and walked down to the shore. The wind was cool, rustling through the trees, and the faint chirp of crickets accompanied the gentle slosh of water. There, at the end of the dock, stood Amelia. She wore a light jacket, her hair pulled into a loose ponytail. He approached quietly, heart in his throat. She heard his footsteps, turned around, and for a moment they just stared at each other, the distance and the weeks that had passed folding in on themselves. He spoke first, voice trembling. "You asked me here?" She nodded, eyes uncertain but calmer than before. "Jean gave you the note?" He swallowed. "Yeah, I wasn't sure if you'd ever want to see me again." She shifted, her gaze flicking to the rippling lake, then back to him. "I wasn't sure either, but I read your letter. I thought about everything. It took me a while to realize that, yes, you lied. But maybe I overreacted too." He hastened to protest. "No, you had every right." She held up a hand. "Let me finish. What you did was wrong, but I also know you as a person. For 2 weeks you were thoughtful, hardworking, and supportive. And if you really were just some arrogant billionaire playing a game, you wouldn't have cared about any of us. But you did. I saw that." Oliver exhaled, relief washing through him. "Thank you for seeing that." She stepped closer, the wooden planks of the dock creaking softly. "I'm still not okay with the bet, but I do believe your feelings for me are real, and I realized I'd rather take a chance on something real than spend my life wondering, what if?" He dared to brush a strand of hair from her face, his hand lingering near her cheek. "Amelia, I promise you I'm done with the games. I'll do whatever it takes to earn your trust back. I want us to try to build something, if you'll have me." Tears glistened in her eyes, but this time they weren't from pain. She covered his hand with hers, leaning into his touch. "I do want that, but you have to understand, I'm not after your money. I never will be." He nodded fervently. "I know, and I love that about you." The word slipped out, love, and for a heartbeat they both froze, letting the weight of it settle. Then Amelia's face softened in a way he'd never seen, and a trembling smile lit her features. "You do?" she whispered. Oliver's voice was raw but steady with conviction. "Yes, I do. I love you, Amelia." For a long moment, her eyes darted across his face, as if searching for any trace of insincerity. Finding none, she let out a quivering breath. "I love you too," she finally whispered. Then she let him draw her into his arms, their first kiss arriving with the hush of the lake, an electric spark of relief, forgiveness, and hope. They pulled apart, still clinging to each other. Amelia let out a watery laugh. "You know, I used to think big declarations of love on a dock by a lake only happened in cheesy movies. Oliver laughed, joy bubbling up inside him. Hey, every once in a while, life imitates art, and I don't mind one bit. He pulled her close again, resting his forehead against hers as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the world in a tapestry of twilight colors. They stood there for a long time, content just to hold each other, letting the gentle sound of the water and the rustling trees bear witness to a moment that felt both delicate and sure. Eventually, she slipped her hand into his. So, what happens now? He gazed out at the lake, then back into her eyes. Whatever we want. I can keep my businesses, but that doesn't mean I want to stay in Manhattan 24/7. I can set up an office closer to here, or we can travel. We can figure it out together. Her lips curved into a tentative smile. I'd like that. I'm not leaving Willow Springs for good, but I'd love to see what the world looks like outside of the diner. Maybe we can strike a balance. He grinned. I'll do anything to make that happen. She pressed her cheek against his shoulder, inhaling the calm of the moment. But, she murmured, if you ever make another bet at my expense, I promise you, I'll chase you away with a broom. He chuckled, pressing a soft kiss to her temple. Duly noted. Never again. The wind carried a gentle breeze across the water as if blessing the vow. They stayed like that, arms wrapped around each other, the lake lapping quietly at the dock. In the distance, the lights of Willow Springs began to glow, reminding them that somewhere out there, real life continued. But in that moment, they belonged exactly where they were, together, forging a new story that went far beyond bets and secrets. It was a love story that began with a lie, yes, but it had blossomed into a truth neither of them could deny. And as Oliver Harrington held Amelia in his arms, he realized this was the one bet he'd never regret losing, because in losing it, he had gained the greatest victory of all.